and we're here to be a resource for the community and to be the eyes and ears for the monitoring team. So if there's anything that we can do, please let us know.
Thank you, Angela. So I'm going to turn it over to Brenda now. So can you, Brenda, just kind of give us a little bit of a summary of what took place in on May 21st, this hearing that Angela was referring to?
Yeah, so I want to back up a little bit before that and just do a brief overview of how we actually got here in the legal case. So, as we already talked about, this case started about 8 years ago. It was filed in 2008. And then in 2011, Judge Snow issued a preliminary injunction. And with this preliminary injunction, he ordered Arpaio and MCSO to immediately stop engaging in these immigration stops. So then there was approximately 2 weeks of a trial in 2012. And then in 2013, the judge issued an order. And the judge agreed with us. He found that MCSO, they were racial profiling. Profiling people. And he then issued another order shortly thereafter. And he required MCSO to undergo a lot of agency-wide changes. And some examples of these changes include requiring all MCSO personnel to undergo and to attend constitutional trainings. They also had to start recording data on traffic stops. And they also had to start issuing traffic receipts to people that they stopped, regardless of whether they received a citation or not. Deputies also had to start wearing body-worn cameras. That's something that was really good that has been implemented. And they also, Judge Snow also appointed a monitor to kind of oversee all of these agency-wide changes and to really be the watcher on this. So that was in 2013. Now let's fast forward to 2015 and to the current contempt proceedings. Now, as we talked about earlier, the current proceedings before us are civil contempt proceedings. These are different from criminal contempt proceedings. This means that Judge Snow cannot order Joe Arpaio to go to jail. That has to be done in criminal contempt proceedings. Now, what the judge can do is he can recommend to the U.S. Attorney's Office to start criminal contempt proceedings. And while we don't know if Judge Snow for sure is going to make that recommendation, we are hopeful that this recommendation will be made. So there are 3 things at issue in these current contempt proceedings. One, we, the plaintiffs, allege that Joe Arpaio and others in MCSO violated the preliminary injunction from 2011 and authorized immigration stops to continue after that 2011 order. 2, we also allege that Arpaio and others concealed important evidence in the case. And then 3, we alleged that Joe Arpaio and others in the MCSO actively ignored court orders to finally gather this additional evidence in the case. So those are the 3 things at issue in the current proceedings. So then, throughout 2015, there was approximately 3 weeks of hearings, and Judge Snow heard all of our evidence. And then he finally issued his order on May 13th, 2016, just last month. And in that order, Judge Snow did find Joe Arpaio and others in MCSO to be in civil contempt of court. He did find that they intentionally violated court orders. So, in his order, he also set a hearing which was scheduled for May 31st, 2016. That was was just last week. And at this hearing, the parties discussed what remedies should be imposed for these contempt findings. What does Arpaio and MCSO have to do because they intentionally violated the court's orders? So the judge brought the parties in, and all the parties discussed what they thought should be imposed. And we, the plaintiffs, we asked for a number of things. One, we asked that the victims of the preliminary injunction violations be compensated, that they receive a money settlement. Two, we asked to enlarge the monitor's duties and authorities, mainly to oversee more compliance with the 2013 order, and to really oversee MCSO's internal investigations process. We also asked for stricter deadlines for full compliance with the 2013 order, and we asked for more reforms in MCSO's internal policies. So that's what we asked for, and that's what was discussed last week in court. So now the parties we have to submit additional documents to the judge, and then there's another hearing that's scheduled for next Friday. And then hopefully, then Judge Snow will issue his final order about the remedies for these contempt violations. And that's where we are today.
So Brenda, because I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are curious, so can you tell us what the difference is between civil and criminal contempt?
Yeah, so as I touched on it a little bit earlier, one of the big differences is that about the remedies of contempt. So in criminal contempt, in civil contempt, the judge really can't order anybody to go to jail. That would have to be done in a criminal contempt proceedings. And those proceedings would have to be initiated by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Judge Snow, in these current contempt proceedings, can't do that. But the difference between civil contempt and criminal contempt really is, like, what's the goal of these different types of proceedings? In civil contempt proceedings, the goal really is to vindicate the interests of the people who, the victims of the contempt. And so that's why we're asking for some compensation, some monetary compensation for the victims, and to see further compliance with the judge's orders. So that's the main difference.
So before we turn it over to the audience members, I just want to introduce three people, actually. I just wanted to introduce our senior counsel, Dan Pacoda, who has been involved in this case from the very, very beginning, and who was instrumental really in pulling together the ACLU, the team essentially that brought this case forward. So we also wouldn't have been here had it not been for Dan. And I also just wanted to introduce two of our board members, Marie Provan, Rivko Knox, and do we have another board member, ACLU board member? Oh, and then Leticia there. Okay, so all of you raise your hands. Raise your hands, yeah. Instrumental because they approved the budget that helped pay for this. So anyway, so let's turn it over. We really wanted to spend more time just hearing from you all and responding to any questions that you all may have. Yes, so.
How do sentences in either a civil case or a criminal case affect Arpaio as an elected official? What capacities would it change or prohibit?
Who wants to take that?
Sure. Well, not necessarily anything. As we know, there are people who are convicted felons who get elected to various offices. In Chicago, it's a prerequisite. It's very hard for this court or any court to do something to an elected official as opposed to all of the other employees at the MCSO. There are much greater constraints. But the goal of the criminal contempt, as you said, is to punish the wrongdoer. So I'm assuming that would have a significant impact on the political prospects of this fellow. if he's convicted, but that's a little down the line. But it's not automatic, like the night today, that he would be fired. Now, his chief executive, this fellow Sheridan, who runs the jails day-to-day, should, if convicted of criminal contempt, be under various state laws fired. And he really is the person who runs it day-to-day.
I'd like to add also something to that. As far as the operation wise, during this last court hearing, the judge did mention something about receivership, about part of the internal affairs investigation piece, because the judge really wasn't too happy with the way that the sheriff's office were investigating themselves and then clearing themselves from any sort of wrongdoing. And so, as far as that, the judge said, I may not be able to fire. The judge said, he might want to take hold of that piece, some sort of receivership of that, and also the ability to fire people. He may not have the ability to fire an elected official, but the other folks are sworn officers, and under the county merit system, they can be fired.
And I do want to clarify that we as plaintiffs, we asked the monitor to take over those internal investigations.
Financial compensation would be paid by Joe and not by the taxpayer?
That's correct.
Well.
Well,
And I think that was a big factor in the judge's decision. He said it repeatedly through the various trials, where he recognizes that if it's just the taxpayers that are paying, there is no sort of personal consequence for Joe itself. And I think what makes this case unique, there are these types of reforms that are happening across the country, for example. But what makes this one as unique is we didn't come to an agreed upon. It's not like the ACLU and MCSO came to an agreed upon consent decree. What happened here was the judge had to issue the ruling, and so we have an elected official, a sheriff, who is recalcitrant, who's been fighting us tooth and nail from the very, very beginning. There are other departments now that are working with court-appointed monitors where it's obviously not as contentious, because the parties came together in the beginning and realized that it's in the interest of the community to just work together. And there's none of that sort of happening here.
And the judge did say he wanted to make sure that there was that Arpaio had teeth in this, or what was it? Skin in this. Only because the judge is fully aware that Arpaio could raise a lot of money like this, and so I think that the phrase that he said, he didn't want this to come out of Friends of Joe.
Yeah.
So.
I didn't quite hear about the cameras. Did the court require that the officers wear body cameras, and are they doing so, and will the videos be available for the public to see?
so as part of the 2013 court order, they were required, MCSO was required to, at first the order required them to install cameras on their cars, on their vehicles. And then the order was amended so that it says that they had to wear body-worn cameras. And all the deputies had to turn them on right at the beginning of a traffic stop. Most of the districts in MCSO have these body cameras, and they're up and running. I believe there is one district that isn't fully operational at this time, but I would have to check on that.
And yes, they are subject to review by
Yes.
the public. The videos
Public
are
record.
public record, so they are, any member of the public can ask for those videos. And I think the irony is that, these, once they do come into compliance, these are really strong policies because it's part of the litigation. We've been, we're involved in crafting these policies, and they're some of the strongest body-worn kind of camera policies. And we're trying to use some of these model policies and trying to leverage the decisions in the Arpaio case to convince other police departments to also update their policies. Because, the irony is that we do have MCSO deputies that are wearing body cams, but we don't have all of the city of Phoenix, for example, officers wearing body cams.
Yeah, what is gonna happen with all of the items confiscated by the deputies through the years? Are you gonna trace back the names of these persons when, for example, when it's a private license or a document or a matricula consular? What is gonna happen with the medallitas or?
Right. Well, I believe that, you know, that was part of, and I'll should probably yield this to the attorney, but I believe that was part of the, one of the requests that the ACLU said that asked perhaps reinvestigating some of these, because these IDs belong to someone who was stopped, whether they were stopped maybe by one officer at you know, when it was initially thought, or, you know, they discovered that there were several officers that conducted these stops. Finding the owners is going to be part of, I believe, of the investigation, and a lot of that is going to have to be reopened.
Can you explain, Lydia, or you or Brenda, explain what these items are that Carmen's referring to?
So in the course of MCSO's traffic stops and stopping Latino drivers for the sole purpose of investigating their immigration status, it was discovered that they confiscated a lot of personal items, IDs, license plates, passports, what have you. And they kept them, and they never returned them. And it was discovered that MCSO was pretty much hoarding all of these items and really didn't do anything with them. They didn't log them, they didn't have any system of record keeping, and they were just sitting there in MCSO offices. So this was actually something that came up during the trial, and it was very surprising when this information came up. So yes, that is going to be part of the investigations to try to trace back where these IDs and everything that was confiscated during these stops were.
Can you talk a little bit about sort of your role on the CAB in terms of sort of the outreach and maybe elaborate a little bit on what you all will be doing over the next few months?
Sure. So one of the things that we are required to do is we're required to hold 3 community forums throughout the year, and also to help the monitor team just give feedback back, whatever we hear in the community, to tell the monitor about what's going on in the community, what we're hearing, and then also if we know anything from the monitoring team to report that back. One of the things that I didn't mention earlier is that currently the MCSO is only in compliance 39% in compliance. There's 87 mandated reforms, and they're currently only at 39% compliance. So I think that's another item that we're looking to push on and to see why that hasn't improved. And so as Brenda mentioned, some of the remedies that they're asking. And I think the judge, one of the things that I found that I liked hearing at the hearing was that there could be the potential for other more repressive remedies if they don't get in compliance, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Yes.
Some of the tactics that he has used in the past have included investigating the judge's wife, the board of supervisors, various other people, anybody who basically crosses him. That was his ploy. Has that been addressed? Is that something that he cannot do anymore? And also the destruction of records. That was another thing that he ordered. The office was ordered to maintain records, and they destroy them.
So do you want to talk about that, Linda? Records and abuse of
Yeah,
power.
so regarding the records, that was one of the main issues for the current contempt proceedings. And the judge did find Arpaio and other higher-ups within MCSO to have done that in violation of court orders. So that's something that will definitely be addressed, hopefully when the judge issues his next order about remedies.
How about the abuse of power piece?
Yes, and as far as the abuse of power when Arpaio investigates the judge, for example, the judge specifically said, even though the judge cannot, find him guilty for criminal, whatever